Hannah Davis. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Hello. It feels great to be able to interview somebody who is also in Ottawa for a change. You are doing your PhD in biology at Carleton University. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so for the non-scientists who are listening, they're like, "Oh, Hannah is a scientist." For other people who are listening who have a science background, how would you explain exactly what it is that you study?
So right now I'm in a lab that does thermal physiology, in my case, using fruit flies, Drosophila melanogaster. It essentially boils down to making them cold, not frozen, just cold, and then seeing what happens to their bodies. Um,
Okay.
so I have mostly been looking at kind of what temperatures different populations will essentially shut down. They go into a chill coma. But I have plans to hopefully do some work looking at the effects of cold and other stressors on the renal organs and other aspects of their biology.
So fruit flies, that already is interesting because I think the average person, really doesn't like fruit flies. I do know that they're kind of a marvel of science, aren't they?
Yeah, they are essentially the model organism. So they're very easy to keep in the lab, very easy to breed. I think most people have the experience of accidentally breeding large numbers of them in their own kitchen. And a lot is known about their genetics and just their biology in general. And so that means when you want to study something new, they are quite a useful species to work with.
So why exactly are you studying the effects of cold on fruit flies? Like, what got you into this?
Essentially, I read about the lab and got into it from there. This is it's not something which I invented. This is a field which has existed for quite a while, and I found out about the PhD position, read up on it, discovered that there's this whole world of finding out how cold affects insects, and decided to give it a shot.
That's interesting because I find that scientists either go into something because it's deeply personal. So, a lot of scientists, especially scientists who study medicine, they've had a family member become sick from this weird illness and they become a specialist in that. You have chosen something just out of pure interest and curiosity.
Yeah. Well, I've been interested in insects for quite a while. I did my master's with termites, and so I knew I wanted to continue working with insects, but I was somewhat flexible about what I would end up doing with insects. Like I'm interested in many aspects of their biology. So learning new things about them in this case in a different species, a different field. Because with termites, I was doing some kind of behavioral stuff. Um, I just find that really cool.
Have you always been into little creatures?
To some extent, I think I got more serious about it in my 20s. But even as a child, well, like most children, I liked watching bugs.
Right. I think it's really cool that you're doing it as a grown up. Um, I'm curious about a term that you used. You said chill coma. So can you
Yeah.
describe exactly what's going on when that happens?
Um, I could go into a lot of detail, but instead,
Please.
I'll try to keep it simple. So I think a lot of people have probably noticed that in the fall, you'll often see insects on the ground and they're alive, but they're not really moving very much. Like you'll see bees and wasps on the ground often like this. Or sometimes you'll find a beetle and it looks like it's dead, but if you take it inside, then all of a sudden it kind of comes back to life. This is because in the cold, insects' bodies slow down. And at a certain point, the brain actually shuts off and the muscles shut off. And the insect is then unable to move. But this is typically a temporary state. So if you bring it back into a warm house, for example, then it can wake up again. Um,
Okay. uh, So, but why do we want to study that? Is it because there might be applications for humans, or is it just because we find it fascinating?
so it is basic research, meaning there are unlikely to be direct applications. However, understanding how insects respond to cold is relevant if we want to understand how they might respond to climate change, for example. So there's some, well, a lot of insects actually are restricted in where they can live based on the climate. So
Okay.
so that's one reason to try and understand that. Another reason is that certain insects are used for biocontrol, for example. So little wasps are used to control caterpillars on in agriculture. And if you're shipping those little wasps, often they're being shipped at a cold temperature, and we want to understand how that's going to affect them too. So there are definitely applications, but those applications are downstream from where I am. I'm really on the side of just trying to understand how things work.
Right. So what have you found so far? What's the coldest temperature that a fruit fly can tolerate?
That's not an easy question for me to answer anyway, because that's not actually what I've been doing. um, so what I have been doing, and I actually just we just submitted a paper on this, was looking at different cold tolerance traits in different populations of fruit flies. And the populations, we had them in the lab, but they were originally derived from flies that were collected in different parts of Europe and Africa. And we were interested in how those populations differed in cold tolerance. And the what we ended up finding out was that if you compare their ability to survive a mild chronic cold stress, so we had them at 4 degrees just for 4 days, there are really obvious differences. So we had a French population and an Egyptian population, and the French population just survived so much better than the Egyptian population. It was quite obvious. I tried to use I numbered my vials so I wouldn't know which line was which when I was recording the data, but it was obvious. However, when I compared them on some other cold tolerance traits, like the temperature at which they go into a chill coma, they were all kind of the same. And so that was really interesting because there are examples of other insects where a species, for example, that's from the north will go into a chill coma at a much lower temperature than a species that's from somewhere warm. So it was interesting just that, they differ based on one trait, but then not others. Um, and that was a bit of a surprise because typically they'll be more cold tolerant based on a whole bunch of different traits, or they just suck based on a whole bunch of different traits.
Okay. So you actually can usually induce a chill coma at about 4 degrees Celsius.
For fruit flies, yeah, like once they get down to 4, so 4 is like a little bit below their chilcoma onset temperature typically, but you do sometimes have some, like if you pre-treat them in certain ways, you can reduce that temperature, and there is definitely some variation with, like, there are some populations which do have lower chilcoma onset temperatures than others, just not the ones we were working with.
Okay. And the ones within the ones that you were working with, what's the most hardy species that you've found so far?
So this is all within one species actually.
Oh,
Yeah, so
okay.
that's kind of, um yeah, so there other people have looked at different species, but we kind of decided to go, well, okay, that's interesting, but what happens when you look within one species?
Okay, so one species, if I'm understanding correctly, that was bred in different environments.
Yes, yes, that's
Gotcha.
yeah. So
Okay.
like fruit
Okay.
flies, this one species of fruit flies all over the world, and different populations have evolved separately from each other in different environments, and then what has that done to them within one species?
That's actually really cool. Now that I really understand it, um, it must be exciting for you it sounds like it's something that you enjoy doing, isn't it?
Well, playing with bugs is fun.
But also conducting experiments.
Yeah, so I've been out of the lab unfortunately for a while, but
Yeah.
in the before times, yeah, it was fun.
So what happens right now, like, because you can't go into the lab, what happens to your research?
A lot of stuff is on hold, unfortunately for me. So other members of the lab are going in, and so they're able to continue their work. But I've been, well, recently I've been working on this manuscript, which we finally submitted. Um, Otherwise, trying to plan new experiments, which hopefully
Right.
other people will help me with.
So outside of fruit flies, let's talk a little bit about termites, only because I actually don't know a whole lot about them. I think I know a little bit more about ants. I've seen a lot of ant documentaries, not so much the termite. Let's start with a little bit of plain English stuff right now, which is what's the difference between an ant and a termite?
A lot. So let's see, how can I put this into plain English? They're very distantly related. So termites are actually social cockroaches. Uh, Ants are more closely related to like flies and beetles and even more closely related to bees and wasps actually, because ants, bees, and wasps are all kind of in the same order. Um, and so for anyone who remembers some biology, uh, there's this big divide between hemimetabolous and holometabolous insects. And the hemimetabolous insects are ones like termites, cockroaches, grasshoppers are a common example where they don't have any kind of pupal stage. The babies look very much like the adults, except without wings and smaller. And so a little baby grasshopper, you can still tell it's a grasshopper, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually it gets wings, and then it's just a typical grasshopper. With the holometabolous insects, so those would be bees, ants, wasps, flies, beetles, butterflies, they have a larval stage which looks nothing like the adults. So with flies, the baby is a maggot. It's just this little squishy thing with typically no legs, and then there's a pupal stage, and then it turns into the adult, which looks completely different. With flies, they typically have wings. Um, in butterflies, you have caterpillar, and then you have a chrysalis, and then you have the butterfly. So these are just these two like fundamental categories of insects, and termites are on one side and ants on the other side.
I actually so this is really surprising to me. I didn't know that they were that distantly,
Yeah,
related in a way, because they look kind of similar, right? I mean, they kind of
yeah,
have a similar structure, I guess. What about let's compare their body structure, ants and termites. Same amount of number of legs,
yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
and torso, head, all that stuff. What's the difference?
Well, ants. So one thing is that ants have a waist, which termites don't have. So that's certainly one thing. Um, Ants, I think, are more frequently dark colored. Termites, a lot of them are light colored and also really squishy. But there's some variation. Like you do also have some dark colored termites, and there are some ants that can be different colors too. So I'd say it's like it's the shape of the body is different. Also, the antennae. Ants, I think all of them have these elbowed antennae, whereas termites, it's more just like a string of beads. It's not.
Oh,
It doesn't have
wow.
a clear elbow in it.
Oh, wow, okay. And you just called termites social cockroaches, which is
Yes.
really interesting because the cockroach is my favorite creature. I love them. I think they're fascinating. I think they're cool. I think the research into antibiotics, that we've researched them for antibiotic production. They're hardy. They can survive almost anything. In what way are termites more closely related to cockroaches?
They are cockroaches. They're just really weird cockroaches. So this was something which was discovered through genetic research. I think maybe 2010. I'm not certain. Um, Although it's been suspected for a while, just because of certain of similarities, like some other similarities between certain cockroach species and termites. But yeah, they are cockroaches. They are nested within that group.
So are they as hardy as cockroaches? They can
No.
survive really extreme. Oh, okay, okay.
They are very squishy.
Okay.
Um, no, they a lot of things eat them. They're definitely not super tough. However, they make up for that with, in some cases, massive colonies and just big numbers.
Yeah, let's talk about their colonies because I know that don't they have like a really interesting kind of class structure, or I
Yeah,
don't know what you call it.
yeah, it's a caste system.
Okay.
So this depends on the termite species. So there is a fair amount of variety here. The species that I worked with, the eastern subterranean termite, is one that's found in eastern North America and also invasive in some other countries. It is in Ontario, but southern Ontario, so Toronto and some areas around there. It has not reached Ottawa, but it's not too far away. And with this is one of the I believe it's one of the so-called I think it's one of the higher termites, and it has so they have workers, they have nymphs, and they have the king and the queen. The fact that there's a king there is another interesting difference from ants.
I was just like staring at you right now because I was like, wait a minute, they have a king?
They
So
do,
tell me
yeah,
more. Tell me more.
yeah. So termites in general, they unlike ants. So an ant queen will mate, and then the male will die, and the queen is able to kind of store enough sperm to last as long as as it needs to last. Termites don't do that. So the king and the queen have to keep on mating in order to have more offspring, and so they do.
How is the king chosen?
You'd have to ask one of the queens.
I know. That's true.
So they'll have a nuptial flight where they will um I think they land and drop their wings and they pair up and then like they follow each other and then find a place to start a colony. I haven't actually seen this. So when I was working with them, um, I was working with lab colonies which never produced these winged reproductives, but this is from what I remember that's how it works.
So wait, so lab colonies don't behave the same way they would in nature?
Not necessarily. They might not get the same cues. So I remember we had lab colonies of a whole bunch of different species, and some of those species did produce winged reproductives from time to time, but I'm not sure what cues they were using, like whether it was light cues because they were in a basement room, but there were small windows, and so they might have been getting day length information from that. Um, I think some species rainfall is also a cue, so I seem to remember that at least some species will emerge after rain, probably because then it's easier for them to dig into the ground. I'm not sure.
Right.
This is not my specialty. This is just kind of half remembered stuff.
But still, I mean, I think it's really cool that you got to actually kind of observe like whole colonies, learn more about them, even the stuff that you're not researching. I'm sure there's things sometimes that you notice that you kind of like jot down just because it's curious.
Yeah, well, I definitely loved just watching termites. So when they're in their in their nest, they are very well hidden. So they're going to be in the soil, they're going to be in wood. Depends on the species as to exactly how and where they live. But the species I was working with, they have in the wild, they'll have these massive, massive colonies that are in both, yeah, soil and wood, and they're very good at keeping hidden. Um,
Hmm. Aren't
so,
there
yeah.
also soldiers?
Oh yes, yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention those.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I just heard about it sometime. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So as I work, I'm trying to remember how their evolution worked, but I seem to remember that it's thought that the soldier class evolved before the other castes, um, which is also kind of interesting because I think virtually all termites have soldiers. There might be some exceptions, but with ants, I don't think that having soldiers is so typical for them. Some of them definitely do, but I don't. I think that was more something that evolved later on with some ants, whereas with termites, it's saw that happened early.
And the soldiers, they just protect the king and queen, right?
They protect the colony.
Oh, they protect the whole colony, okay.
Yeah. So one of our lab colonies was it was I'm trying to remember the name of the species. It was one of those species that builds those like really massive termite mounds in I think somewhere in Africa or something.
Mhm.
And in the lab, unfortunately, they don't build those huge structures, but they still build some stuff. And it's a fairly large species, and the soldiers are quite impressive because they are quite large, a lot larger than the workers, and they also will be stationed at kind of the entrances to tunnels, and they respond to sound. So I really liked to go into their room and just say very loudly, "Hello," and they would headbang, and you'd hear this audible rattling sound of the soldiers sending out an alarm signal by headbanging
Whoa, like they bang their heads on what? On the
on
ground?
yeah, well, like on whatever
Wow.
substrate.
Oh, that is so
And
cool.
that headbanging is actually a very common termite alarm signal. So the smaller ones do it too. I'm not sure if all termites do it, but certainly the ones that I was working with did. And but the ones I worked with are smaller, so you I didn't hear it very often, just sometimes. Um, the workers also communicate through vibration. So sometimes they'll shake their whole bodies and something called jittering, but we don't really understand what that means. Sometimes it seems to be alarm, but sometimes they seem to be communicating something else.
Oh, wow. So there's a lot of research left to do on termites, obviously.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I am by no means an expert. I was privileged to work on them for a couple of years, and I still love them. But there are many others who know a lot more than me.
What do you feed termites in the lab?
So in like so okay, so we had some rooms where were keeping them long term, um, or rather, I should say, this is actually a facility in Germany called the BAM, and they have had this termite rearing thing going on for decades. So they are experts here. I was very lucky to be able to use their facilities. So in those long term rearing rooms, the termites are fed wood. So just like logs. Or in some cases, for some species where they're kept in smaller containers, they were just given little blocks of wood.
Okay.
Um,
Because
yeah.
that's what they usually assign of termites is that they're eating the wood in the house, right?
Yes, yes.
Mm.
Um, for experiments, we would often give them filter paper to eat because then we could put some plexiglass or some other glass on top of the filter paper and then actually see them digging little tunnels into the filter paper, and then we could observe them. But filter paper is not the best diet for termites. It's fine for an experiment, but you don't want to keep them on that long term.
Okay. And so were you also studying cold tolerance in termites?
No, I wasn't. I was looking at how they responded to a fungal disease.
Oh, interesting. And what did you discover?
So I was interested in their behavioral immunity. So this is how they use behaviors to protect their colony. And more specifically, I was interested in how at different stages of infection they will use different behaviors. So early in the infection, they will groom their nest mates, like, and they're basically physically removing the fungal spores, and they're able to swallow those fungal spores safely. But if the spores are left kind of on the outside of their bodies, then it can go very badly. It's good for them to groom those off. But then later in the infection, they'll still do some grooming, but then they also start switching to cannibalism. Wh-
Okay, hold on, hold on. You're saying grooming as in they clean each other?
Yep, yep. It's
Wait, do termites have
adorable.
tongues? Do they have
Mm,
tongues?
they don't have tongues. No, they've got a lot of mouth parts though, and a lot more mouth parts than we do, and it works.
I need to find a video of this because it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah, I think social insects in general tend to groom each other, at least to some extent. I'm not sure exactly how that works with ants and bees and wasps, but keeping each other clean and keeping themselves clean is important for social insects, especially just because of the risk of disease spread within their colonies.
And how do you like what kind of diseases are we talking about here?
So for termites, fungal diseases are a big threat because they're living in soil and rotting wood, and their tunnels are this lovely climate controlled, very moist environment, which is perfect for fungi.
Of course, of course. And then they usually all succumb to it?
The fungus which we were working with is very deadly. So if you inoculate just one termite with, well, you don't actually need to use all that much. That termite will die. Um, I was using pretty high doses in my experiment, because I wanted to kind of evoke a strong reaction from the non-infected termites, and yeah, th- they're pretty good at grooming it off and getting rid of it. But if you up the dose high enough, then it will kill them all.
Wow. So, you know what? I've just made a connection here. What I find really interesting is that you have studied termites and now you're studying fruit flies, which are two types of creatures that usually we exterminate.
Well, that wasn't intentional, but I think that pest insects often do make good study subjects, partly because you could typically breed them in fairly large numbers. um,
Does it bother you though when people exterminate, insects, or does it just make sense to you?
it bothers me when it's not necessary, like
Mhm.
when people just kill insects because they don't like them. That I don't like that. But there are times when you need to. If termites are eating your house, that is dangerous. They can, yeah, like the species I worked with, they will just hollow that wood out, and that could be something could collapse.
Yeah, for sure. So you said that the termites that you studied were mostly like native to southern Ontario. Are there any termites in Ottawa?
Not that I know of. And I don't
Okay.
think I'm not sure if they're native per se to southern Ontario, but I think it's kind of, as far as I know, it's well, they're definitely native to the US just south of the border. I'm not certain how they moved into Canada, but um, yeah, I don't know if they're. I wouldn't really call them invasive per se. I think it's more just range expansion. At some point, they were just able to get a little bit further north because they're quite
Okay.
common in the eastern U.S.
It's kind of like American cockroaches, which are the big ones, the big cockroaches. And I remember speaking with somebody who worked in pest control, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, I said, have you ever seen those in the wild in Ottawa?" And he said, "Actually, I have. I
Hmm.
have. I've seen them in I'm not gonna say where because it's a bit of a trade secret, but there is one location in Ottawa that has them pretty often. Um, but I do find them I find cockroaches have you ever studied cockroaches?
I haven't, but I know people who have, and
Okay.
I find them very interesting. However, I will say that the room, like the room where they are kept at any facility that studies them, is the worst room. The smell, oh my goodness, is the worst.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the smell comes from, and I don't think it's all species that smell, but certainly some of the ones that people work with in Germany. It's intense. I once visited a facility where they were doing a lot of animal testing, um, on like lots of different animals, like pest species. I think that the institute was they I think it was some government institute, and it had something to do with like testing, I think pest control stuff. So anyway, they had just like every species of pest. So they had rodents, they had, I think they even had pigeons, um, like all this kind of stuff. And the rodent rooms were pretty smelly. They were keeping their rodents in quite good conditions, actually. Like I've I had this like idea of what animal research facilities would look like, and it was nothing like that. They were, they had lots of nesting material, places to hide. The one of the species of rats that they had this like climbing gym pretty much that took up a high ceilinged room, and you could see these little groups of rats kind of peering out of boxes at the visitors. That room smelled like the worst public bathroom you could imagine. So just very strong smell of urine. But I could handle it. Then when we started going through the insect rooms, the cockroach room, I could barely get through the door. It was just the
Wow.
strongest smell of vomit, and it was horrible. I don't know which species it was. They had several in there, but whatever it was bad.
I think
um,
it's just cool that you had the experience to go visit a place like that.
yeah, it was part of a course that I was taking. I guess the professor had some connections, and so we got to go on a field trip, and it was really cool.
Cool. So what led you to studying in Germany?
So I actually dropped out of university in Canada. Um, I was trying to do computer science, and at some point realized that much as I love computers, much as I love coding, it was not something I wanted to do long term, and I just burned out really, really badly and ended up dropping out. Then I decided that, well, what tiny amount of money I had left, I might as well use it to go to Europe because I'd been wanting to do that for a while. And I figured if I was going to be broke and miserable, I might as well do it in another country. Um, After being in Germany for a couple of years and improving my German, I found out that universities there do not have tuition. And
Ah,
so I
right.
decided to just give it another shot. And so I applied to study biology at a German university. Miraculously, they actually let me in, even though I was already a dropout. And I ended up getting both my bachelor's and my master's there.
Oh, wow. I actually didn't know that about you. Huh. So you did your bachelor's and your master's in Germany, and you decide to come back to Canada?
Yeah, yeah. For a few reasons. Part of it was just wanting to come back to Canada, I guess.
Mhm.
Part of it was finding out about this PhD opportunity and thinking it sounded really good, and then it just happened to be in Ottawa, which is where I'm from. Um, I was also partly motivated by Brexit because one of the ways I was able to live in Germany was because I've got dual citizenship. I'm British and Canadian, and I didn't like the idea of staying in Germany but not having nearly as many rights.
Right.
I could have, applied for some status that would let me stay there, but I wouldn't be able to vote anymore, and I just didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to suddenly go from from having rights to not having rights.
Right, and I think, I mean, let me know if you agree with this statement, but I think having done education overseas brings you a perspective that a lot of Canadian students don't have.
I think so. It certainly gives me a perspective on what it's like to be an international student.
Mhm. Right. And did you find that you got, I guess, mentorship and experience with professors that you probably wouldn't have had in Ottawa?
Um, I don't know. I think that certainly I met different people, but even here there are professors from different countries.
Right.
So over there, of course, I got to meet a lot more German professors, and there are certainly cultural differences between German universities and Canadian universities. But you do meet a wide variety of people here as well.
Um, Give me an example of a cultural difference between a German university and a Canadian university.
Um, I think there's a different approach to education. So one thing which really surprised me when I started studying at a German university was, how in Canadian universities there's always like this huge bookstore where they sell like
Mhm.
all this university branded stuff, and it's like all this big deal. Over there, the closest equivalent was like It's basically just this tiny little boutique kind of area across from a coffee shop in one of the buildings. It had fairly short hours. There was just one person working there. Um, they sold a small variety of t-shirts. Not very
Hmm.
much.
So it's less, kind of less big business, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. Also, no sports facilities at my university. So that was another
Oh.
thing. Yeah. And there was also a lot less, I guess, stupid competition between
Hmm.
universities. I'm not going to say there's no competition, but over there, it's like the students are not encouraged to hate the other university in town, which is unfortunately the case here. Um,
Mhm.
it's just, I liked my university. The other university in the city was also good.
That is definitely interesting. Having been out of that world for a long time, it's good to get an idea of what universities are like,
Yeah.
not just these days, but also the different cultures.
Yeah, and some other things. So over there, it's the norm to have 100% of your grade come from a final exam,
Oh,
which actually worked pretty well for me because like I test pretty well, but I have a much harder time kind of keeping up doing high quality work throughout the semester. So for me, it's like I will often, in the Canadian system, like I'll screw up on some early assignment and then it'll just destroy my self confidence because like, well, I've already
aw.
messed up my average. Um, but in Germany, like I would be a complete idiot up until about a week before the exam, and then I would study like crazy and do well. But I realized
Yeah.
that not everyone works this way, and I was lucky that the system did work for me.
Are you somebody who, I guess you've always enjoyed schooling?
Um, I've always enjoyed learning. Um,
Right.
Not I haven't always enjoyed school, but I've definitely always enjoyed learning.
Okay. Aside from school cultural differences, um, what about the difference in creatures, nature, fauna? Is there something that you discovered in Germany out in nature that doesn't exist in Canada?
Lots of stuff.
Like
um,
what?
but one example, which I was actually just thinking about earlier today, is mistletoe. So
Mi- really?
there is a mistletoe species, like well something else that we call mistletoe anyway, that is in North America, but like the stereotypical mistletoe is native to Europe, I believe, and in Berlin, you see it in like every park. The trees would be full of it.
And okay, so now I have to ask: do people have the custom of kissing each other under the mistletoe there?
I'm actually not certain. Um,
Ah, it's curious.
they certainly don't do it under every tree.
Guess
And
not.
one reason why I'm not certain is that actually when I was over there, I usually went to the UK for Christmas because that's where I've got a lot of relatives. And so I don't know actually a lot about German Christmas traditions. I know some stuff like Christmas markets, for example, are one amazing German
Yes.
Christmas tradition, but I wasn't typically celebrating Christmas itself with Germans.
Okay. But what about bugs? Did you find anything interesting in Germany?
Um, Lots of cool stuff. Yeah, there's some species are actually ones that we also have here, but they're invasive, or at least non-native. European hornets, for example, I love them. They're big, they're beautiful, very
But they're
impressive.
not in Canada?
They actually are here. Yeah,
Okay.
they've managed to find their way over here. I don't think they're causing all that many problems, but they're not native here. Um,
So why do you love the European hornet so much?
they're big,
Ah.
big and charismatic. Um,
They are hornets. Okay, hold on here. Tell me the difference between a hornet and a wasp.
a hornet's just a type of wasp.
Oh, it's a
So
type of
yeah,
wasp.
yeah. So the true hornets are in the genus Vespa, and Vespa literally means wasp. um, and but colloquially will often refer to just large wasps that are not in the genus Vespa as hornets, like bald-faced hornets, for example. They're not true hornets, but they're big, so we call them hornets anyway.
So the hornets are just bigger than wasps?
They're just
Or sorry, they're a type of wasp, but they tend to be huge.
yeah, pretty much.
Ah, okay. Do they bite?
Um, they might. I don't know. I haven't tried. They could definitely sting. Well, the females can sting. The males can't.
Okay.
But that's the case for bees and wasps in general. That only the females can sting because the stinger is actually modified lady parts, which is
Hold on, let me think about that. Hold on, hold on. The stinger is a modified lady part.
yep. So it's the ovipositor. So like the part that they would use to lay eggs.
Oh,
It's been modified to have venom, and I'm not
to
sure.
bring you great pain.
Hmm?
It's been modified to bring you great pain,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. So for to defend themselves, and in the case of wasps, it's also for well for a lot of species anyways for hunting.
Okay. Wow, I'm just sitting with that idea because I had no idea. You've just, like, given me one of those, like, you know, moments where you've, like, taken the words out of my mouth because I have no idea what to say next. But that's a really good tidbit about wasps, and it's wasps and
And
I
bees
guess
and ants, like
bees. Yeah.
anything which has a stinger, like in that group, if it can sting you, it's female. The
I also
males,
did not know
the
that.
males, I think some species they might try to bite you, but they can't really do all that much. And so if you can identify the sex of a bee or a wasp or whatever, it's really useful because it means you know how careful you need to be with this thing.
Wow, because I knew that mosquitoes, I think it's only females as well,
It's
right?
for mosquitoes, it's only females that bite, but that's for other reasons. So they need blood to I think it's like for egg development, and obviously males are not doing that. So that's why only the females
Wow.
bite. The both males and females, when they just want food for themselves, they will drink nectar.
Okay. Huh, I mean, this is really cool. What's funny is that one of the things when I started this podcast, I started getting, requests here and there, and people were like, "Bring on a bug expert. Bring on somebody who could talk about little creatures outside of the microscopic stuff that I usually talk
Yeah.
about." So, it's fun, and I know that you do some photography as well, Hannah. And one of the things that really I found really beautiful on your website is the pictures that you've taken of caterpillars. They're just beautiful.
Caterpillars are kind of fun.
Yeah. Is that a creature that you study for fun as well?
I think I have kind of a typical appreciation for caterpillars. I think most people like caterpillars. They're cute.
Right.
Some of them are soft.
Right.
Um, but I actually find other insects more interesting usually.
Like
Well,
what?
flies, for example, are
Hmm.
just such a ridiculously diverse group. And also, some of them are really impressive mimics. So hoverflies are this one group of flies. You've probably seen them. They'll often hover in place, and a lot of them look a lot like bees and wasps. So you may well have seen
Oh
them, but
yeah.
thought that they were bees or wasps because they're often striped like black and orange or black and yellow, and you'll see them on and around flowers. But once you get the hang of it, you can recognize them as flies. Um, the heads look different. The antennae are typically much shorter, and if you can get a really good look at it, you can see that they only have two wings rather than four. But that can be harder to see.
I've actually totally seen these creatures. What do
Mm.
you call them again?
Hoverflies,
Hoverflies?
yeah,
I'm
they're
gonna write this down
yeah
so I
they're
can look it up.
they're also called flower flies or syrphids. But yeah, look up any of those names and you'll find the group.
Flower flies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely seen those and have mistaken them for some sort of wasp or
Yeah.
something because so they are mimicking the behavior of wasps?
Yes, yes. The appearance and in many cases behavior as well. They're visiting
Whoa.
flowers because they're eating pollen, or I think I'm not sure they drink nectar as well, but I'm fairly certain they eat pollen at least. Um, and but yeah, they want predators to think that they are more dangerous than they are.
Wow, and humans, obviously, because I definitely stay away when I see
Yeah,
them.
I don't.
But do they so they don't sting?
No, 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 they can't. They're
Oh,
completely
so cool.
harmless. Can't sting, can't
So
bite.
cool.
They're just cute little flies. But they want you to think that they can sting.
Wow, that's really thank you for sharing that
Mm.
because honestly, I've always wondered.
Yeah, and there's some that look exactly like wasps or exactly like bees. Some of them are really impressive mimics. Others are not so convincing, but I guess when they just buzz past you, you don't see them clearly enough, and it's good enough. But I like
Wow.
the ones that like almost trick me, where I have to look at them a second time before I realize what they actually are.
Is there actually like a whole class of creatures that are called mimics?
It's not like one, cohesive group, but there are like mimicry is very common in nature.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I interviewed an expert in biomimicry and bio-inspired design and all that, so we talked a lot about how humans study nature to create sustainable things, designs and things like that, but I didn't know that other creatures mimicked other creatures,
Yeah,
other than humans.
it's extremely extremely common. Um, and certain there's certain, I guess, models which are very popular. So pretending to be a bee or a wasp, it's a good idea. So these flies do it. I think there are even some beetles that have kind of stripes, and so they're also sort of mimicking wasps. But then ants are another very popular model because ants are scary. They have they're tough. They bite. They've got these huge colonies. A lot of predators will avoid them, and so there are a huge number of insects and spiders that will pretend to be ants.
What? I did not know that.
Look up ant
What
mimicking spiders. Like some of
I
them are
am
amazing.
so spiders are trying to mimic
Yeah,
ants.
yeah, because especially
Wow.
little tiny jumping spiders, they can't really defend themselves all that well, and they know that a lot of predators will just avoid anything that looks like an ant.
I've got to admit, actually, I had a very heavy, let's say, dislike of spiders until I joined Twitter last year and started seeing a bunch of spider pictures,
Mm.
spider videos from scientists. Now I love them. I see a spider now and I want to protect its life.
Oh yeah, I love
Um,
that.
they're so cool,
Yeah,
especially the tiny jumping
yeah,
spiders.
they're so cute.
Aren't they? I mean, and they're harmless, right?
Yeah, I mean, they could bite you, but it would just it would just hurt. it's it,
Right.
and I think you'd really have to force them to bite you. They're not going to bite for no reason.
Right. I was reading and I forget who the author is, but I was reading a book and there was a chapter on spiders and it was essentially it's inefficient for a spider to bite a human
Yeah,
if it doesn't have to.
yeah. Well, it's also dangerous. We are very large, potentially predatory. Why is it going to put itself in that position unless it feels it has to?
Right. Of course. I want to we have about 10 minutes left. Hannah, I want to talk to you about something non-science, which is that you're expecting a baby.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I haven't been in the lab for a while.
Yeah, you've been posting a lot of cool pictures and just posts on Twitter, which is something I wanted to bring up during this interview because not a lot of women who are expecting necessarily talk about it. It's not common in academia, I find.
Mm,
So, do
yeah.
you find it's is it an issue to be expecting when you're a woman in academia?
It's definitely going to make things a lot more difficult. So, well, for the past 9 months, basically, well, I guess, past
Right.
8 months now. Um, I have not been going into the lab. There's some chemicals that we work with which are not really compatible with pregnancy. Plus, I've been dealing with some fairly intense fatigue, and then there's also COVID risk. So
Right.
that has definitely slowed a lot of things down. And then I'm planning to go on maternity leave for a year, so that's also gonna put a lot of things on hold. So I'm still gonna try and do my research, but things are looking a lot different now than they were before. um, it's definitely possible to have a child and also be a scientist, but that doesn't mean it's easy.
Right. Exactly. And so you said that it's gonna pause your research. Is it still your intention to finish your PhD, I guess, afterwards?
That's my current intention. I'm
Right.
really hoping that it'll work out.
Right, of course. No, I mean, it's a, a topic of conversation that comes up, which is that, it can be harder for women in science, especially, if they wanna start a family.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that my advisor is very supportive. He like well, his wife had a baby very recently, so um, he understands.
Right.
And at Carleton, I know a number of the female faculty have children themselves, so that's also good. Just to know that there is that support from people who have power. um,
Right.
and I'm not certain like how much I guess how much support will come from the university per se, but at least on the part of the biology department, they've all been very supportive so far.
Oh, that's really cool. And are you excited about motherhood? Do you find, that you're more excited, or do you find that you're a little bit scared?
I'm definitely scared.
Yeah.
It's like
What
yeah, I've taken a prenatal class. They walked us through all the gory details of giving birth. It's just like, yeah, that sounds horrifying.
Right. Of course, let's not lie about it, right? I mean, it's terrifying. I can't imagine because I don't have kids. I don't want kids, but I've had a lot of friends, and my sister's gone through childbirth, and it can be absolutely terrifying. But at the same time, I think this is going to be. You're a scientist. You're somebody who's already curious. I'm sure that you're gonna, you know, almost study this
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, well, I've definitely found it really interesting just like seeing how pregnancy affects my body because I didn't know very much about it beforehand. I'd heard some things, but there's a lot of stuff that pregnant women generally don't talk about. Um, like I knew that, yeah, like pregnant women have problems with, being tired and stuff. I didn't know beforehand how much of that is in the first trimester because I'm like, well, of course, if you're pregnant, you're carrying all this extra weight. Of course, you're going to be tired. Turns out in the first trimester, the fatigue is just intense. At least for me, it hit me really, really hard, and I was just unable to do anything for months. Um, and it's because the body is just using so much energy to build the placenta, and
Ah,
it's
of course.
extremely energetically intensive, even though the baby's not growing all that much at that time. Um, just building this new organ from scratch takes a lot
Isn't
out of
it
you.
amazing? But isn't it really when you stop and pause and think about every step of the way, like you said, the building of the placenta, the development of the fetus, all this stuff, and how it expands in your body. I've heard that problems like heartburn is
Yeah,
an issue.
I've managed to avoid that. I had some indigestion earlier on, but then that went away.
Okay.
um, yeah, I've had a lot of symptoms that just kind of come and go, and aches and pains that'll be like horrible for a week and then are replaced with different aches and pains. um, so I've had, yeah, some typical pregnancy symptoms and others not. um,
Right.
and I've also been just surprised by like how diverse it is. So I was able to avoid really bad morning sickness, which was nice. What I did have though was mild nausea late in the day, which really threw me off before I knew I was pregnant. It's like, I'm tired all the time and I feel a little bit nauseous, but only late in the day. Can't possibly be pregnancy. And well,
Wow.
it turns out that that is one manifestation of morning sickness, that not everyone actually gets sick per se. Some just get really mild nausea and it's not necessarily in the morning.
Wow, and so when is the baby due?
Late January.
Late January, so we're like a month, well, I think by the time this episode airs, it'll be just a few weeks away.
Hmm.
So that's gonna be really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, just before we go then, you're gonna take a year off and I guess, be a full-time mom, right?
That's the plan. Um,
Right.
Yeah, especially with COVID, I really don't like the idea of putting baby into daycare earlier than necessary. And everything I've been reading about, just the current advice is, if you can, it's good to like to breastfeed for at least a year, for example. Obviously, not
Right.
all women can. It's totally fine if you can't or choose not to, but I would like to, and there are some benefits to doing so. So that's kind of the plan.
Of course. Well, I think it's a beautiful thing to do. Like you said, if you can do it, I think it's beautiful. You're not going to miss any moments. You're going to see the full development of this
Mm,
little boy or girl, and I think it's going to be fabulous. And research will always be there.
yeah,
That's the thing, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Please go ahead. It
No,
looks like you want
no, go
no.
go
Okay,
ahead,
no
go
more
ahead.
comments on that. No. Well, I'm just going to wrap this up then. Hannah Davis, thank you so much for joining me. You've really enlightened me in terms of not just fruit flies, but the I have a lot to Google now after this interview. So I appreciate that actually.
Oh, thank you. I always like to
Yeah.
geek out over bugs.
Well, you're always welcome to geek out with me again. So thank you. I wish you all the best with the little baby, and all the best with your research afterwards.
Thanks, and I wish you all the best too.
Thank you very much.